Welcome to Pods with Posh and Paul, a podcast designed to inspire and challenge listeners through story, experience and insight. To face adversity, learn from suffering and discover how to embrace life with a heart filled with love and gratitude. We are so thrilled to have you journey with us and can't wait to share your stories. Join Sue O'Callaghan and Joanne Webb as we disrupt the theory that everyone has perfect lives.
Hi, thanks so much for listening and welcome into our Pods with Posh and Paul tribe. Today we delve into the devastating effects of betrayal and deception when you don't have the tools or skills to deal with the hurt, shame and embarrassment it causes. It's a privilege to be joined by the very busy Owen Pomana. Owen had a happy childhood, attended boarding school, joined the Navy and then met the girl of his dreams. He thought he had found his happy ever after. After his life imploded, Owen's life looked very different. Rather than the idyllic happy ever after, instead it included sleeping rough, time in the sex industry, gangster life, several stays in prison, and him seriously contemplating suicide. Owen talks openly about dealing with pain and rejection, learning from the storms of life, finding a mentor and turning his suffering and life's experiences into a passion for helping others. Today, Owen works tirelessly with the homeless, is determined to eradicate sex trafficking and has many projects on the go to help people from all walks of life. When he found a mentor, he also discovered his faith, and every day Owen lives and breathes kindness and generosity. It's a pleasure to welcome Owen Pomana.
Owen, thank you so much for joining us, taking time out today.
Yeah, it's great to be with you guys again. I'm really encouraged and pumped that my story can be of use, anywhere for God's glory. So thanks for having me on again.
So the last time we had you on, we were listening to your incredible testimony about working on the streets and feeding the poor at this time of need in lockdown. But we know also you have an incredible story to tell about your own life transformation. So we'd love to hear about where you've come from and the journey and what that looked like for you.
Gee, 30 minutes won't be enough for me to share, but I'll share key principles of my journey and the struggles and the wrestles and how the mind was thinking at the time and how God has transitioned my heart. Again, I make no strong apologies for my strong Christian witness, because for me, I got to hear and know the voice of God. I've learned to know the voice of the Lord through many different values, I guess, in life. So, I'm just like anybody else. I've had dreams and I've had aspirations, and I've had an incredible journey of ups and downs and mountains and storms and trials. I was amazed when I learned about the word Bible. It's a book of instruction before leaving Earth. It's a training manual. So, just like any book that you read, there's principles to the actual when, what, and how word or story that's been presented mean for someone like me. So, I learned, wow, what does that story mean for me? So, book of instruction. It's a book of instruction, how to live your life.
For people out there who are maybe not religious, there might be some people who call it different things. So there might be people might be spiritual, people might have a really strong intuition. Because I never really used to think I was a religious person until I read Conversations with God by Neil Donald Walsh, and it really brought the two realms together for me, religion and spirituality, and realising that this is heaven or earth and we can decide how we decide to live it here right now. And I love that you've obviously got this Christian faith, and that's what's brought you to where you are today and all the amazing, amazing work you do for others. You are such a people person. You know people, you feel their energy, and you do great work. You're doing all this great work. People just think you're this great character, you shine, but you haven't always had an easy life. So can you just tell us a couple of things about the couple of hardships you've been through, just so our listeners know that your life isn't perfect either?
Yeah. I went to a Catholic boys' boarding school. I had an education. My family were poor. My dad was a shearer on a farm, and my mum was a nurse, and they had 6 kids. So, hadn't it been for the kindness and generosity of farmers, they sent us to boarding school. And so, through that tuition, we got an education. My father died when I was 15 years old. That was the first sign of trauma for me. To lose, a parent when you're 15 years old is really hard.
Mm-hmm.
And so we never really had a father figure, although there were times that we mentioned the hard things on living on the farm. So I went from college to the Royal New Zealand Navy. and I became a seaman gunnery rate, and then I transferred into doing different courses all the way around the world, from Melbourne back to New Zealand to being in the diving branch. Again, that transition in life was, we came from a hard place, but we were go-getters as kids, and so because we never really had anything, so it was handed to us on a plate. So we learned to wrestle with life. We had bare feet, you know what I mean, when we went to school. There was only one selection of food, jam sandwiches, when we were kids. But in the Navy, it taught me how to live. But I had my first encounter with the influence of words, or the power of words that people would speak over your life. And just to give an example, I was painting the ship grey, because that's what you do when you're in the Navy. You learn how to paint things grey. Everything's grey. I sat and I heard the noise of this clink, 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 clank, clank, clank running along the causeway. And I stopped and I pondered. These guys look like Darth Vader, in black suits. They look like superimposed, power creatures, whatever. And I thought, what the heck are they? But they were clearance divers. And my boss came past and he gave me a kick and he said, boy, all you're going to be doing is painting that ship grey all your life. So, the negative influence in someone gave me a desire to think, oh, hey, you don't know me. No, I'm going to become one of those one day. And I actually did. So, there's negative influences that people can speak over your life. Words have power. Yeah. And so I went from 7.5 years in the Navy, from traveling the world, to experience some amazing things. I learned how to drink too, and I learned how to fight. You know what I mean? So, like, you could be a fit person who loves to drink, and that's what happened with most of us young people. We just would go ashore, chase girls, get drunk, and that was our life for 7.5 years. When I left the Navy, I wanted to do a New Zealand SAS course, but they wouldn't release me to do a course. So I went home and I became a personal trainer. At that time, my two older brothers were world powerlifting champs. They were amazing. They're legends in the sport of powerlifting. But they were so big, I didn't want to be that big. I wanted to have the chiseled body, the abdominals and all those things. I was 25 years old. And I found the most beautiful girl that lived in Napier. And I thought, I'm going to marry that girl. Just the girl of my dreams. And we're going to live the life with the nice house and the nice picket fence, and we're going to have babies and all that sort of stuff. And everyone chased this girl. They liked her, but I got her. This was the lesson that I learned. Never tell your best friend, hey, look after my missus, when I went away overseas to compete at the World Bodybuilding Champs. Well, I came back to actually find them in bed with each other. So that was a hard thing for me to see, because I'd never been rejected before. Wow. Your rejection is a hard thing, especially when you find love, or you think it's love. The disappointment of a friend, the deception, all that sort of stuff just ruins your mind, and it can ruin your heart really quickly. So,
and Owen, that will be a resonating point for lots of our listeners today. Lots of our listeners will be at that point right now, and it's dark, it's raw, and it's real. How did you deal with that at that moment?
Well, I beat my friend up. I turned up on her doorstep at 12 o'clock at night because I wanted answers. Not from her, because that hurt was already made, but a best friend, well, that's a different story. Being in the armed services, we trusted in our friends, but people who are in the civilian world, well, I thought they were just going to be like my Navy mates, but they weren't. Well, he wasn't. And so I wanted to confront that with violence. I wanted to hear from his voice. So I gave him a beating, and then I wanted to commit suicide. I went up to a big hill called Bluff Hill in Napier, and 2 hours I stood on the edge of that cliff, and I chickened out. It was too high in the end. So I didn't want to stay in Napier. So I took off to Owen. My mate was doing snowboarding. And so I went down there, and things never got any better, because when you bottle things up, it just, the voices in my head and in my heart, because I didn't have any ability to be able to deal with problem solving, especially rejection. I became very bitter, and I turned to alcohol. And when I was on the alcohol, I just became angry and bitter, and would just beat people up at the pub. I actually got asked to leave, or Cooney, believe it or not, 25 years old. I chucked a couple of mongrel mob members out the pub window. I was told within the space of a week, they're going to come back and kill you. So I rang my mum and said, Mum, I just love you, see you later. And I packed my bags, $500 in my pocket, and I jumped on a plane to Sydney. I ended up in King's Cross, of all places, a place that wasn't a stranger for me, because being in the Navy, we travel up to all those places. So I went to a dodgy backpackers lodge in King's Cross, and I just thought, what the heck am I doing here? The last thing that a person wants to do is to ask for help.
Everything you just said there, Owen, screams like, obviously, you know, you were dealing with a lot of trauma, a lot of hurt. Rejection is one of the hardest things to deal with. It makes us question our worth. You know, it affects our ego. When we have our heart broken, that's hard enough to deal with at the best of times, but for your best friend to do it, that's double deceit. And then it's important for our listeners to understand that we turn to these things, like we turn to anger, we turn to rage, we can put our hurt onto other people. So for you to become aggressive, for you to start wanting to fight other people, you're just transferring your hurt and rage onto other people. And then there's that addiction where we can turn to alcohol because we're trying to cover the pain all the time. And if we don't get to the cause of the pain, then these things stay with us, don't they?
Yeah, if you come back to the root of a problem, something starts from a seed or a root. And then if you can alleviate what that void is, so there'll be an arm of things that are suggestions, alcohol, drug addiction, whatever it is, sex or whatever, fills the mind but doesn't deal with the trauma. Just like words are like arrows, right? And if an arrow pierces the heart, you get wounded. But the easiest thing when you train, you know, how to exercise the thought process in your heart, it's as easy as putting a shield up and saying, no, I don't receive your words. You receive words, well, you get hurt. But if you don't have to receive people's words, most of the people that I meet, especially young people that are hurt or broken, is because of the words that were spoken over them. Life and death power in your tongue. And so it's an important thing that you choose good, uplifting words. That's what I do, because everybody remembers the bad, nasty, negative words because they're arrows. And if you don't know how to deflect those arrows, you get wounded.
And those are arrows we can send over other people very easily, but we can also send those arrows over ourselves by what we think about ourselves, by our low self-esteem, our self-hatred, the shame we carry. I hate myself, I've done this, I'm not worth it because I've done this, and so on. So there you are, Owen, you're in Sydney, your life has fallen apart, you've lost the woman of your dreams, as you say, you've been betrayed by your best friend, and you've landed in King's Cross. Where did your story go from there?
Into my pocket, I had $100. And that $100 went down to $10. And that $10, the amazing survival technique was to live off a loaf of bread, a packet of chips. I make chip sandwiches. And I found a cardboard box because I never had money to stay in that lodge. The last thing I wanted to do was ask my mum, my brothers and sisters, because of the shame, all right, the hurt, the bitterness. And the last thing you want to do is to trouble people. I can do this, I can get myself out of this, but reality is, you can't. And so I didn't have anyone to vouch for me for coming to Australia. I never had a telephone. I never had an address that I could say, oh, where do you live? You know, who's going to give you a reference? I never had any of that. So I found a cardboard box and I went down to a place called Rushcutters Bay and I made my bed in the corner of a bush. The box was to shield me from the shame, so that people couldn't see my eyes, my face, because I felt you felt like you were hidden when you've got a wall up around you. And so I lived in that park for about 3 months, and I would go in and out of the public toilet, have a wash, and I'd just sit in the park trying to figure out what the heck am I going to do from here. I made friends with street kids, Aboriginal street kids in King's Cross. Obviously, people know people are hurting or broken, and street people, they'll just gel towards you. And these kids taught me how to live in the street, and they were good little thieves. They would steal food and do all little rorts and rants. I did not know that there were soup kitchens. I didn't know that there were churches or outreach centres within King's Cross that could have helped me. This is the hardest bit of my journey, was to share in my brokenness. I met a friend who was a stripper for Australian Manpower. But he was also a gigolo or a male prostitute. So in my desperation, I became a gigolo or a male prostitute. I would sell my body for food and a blanket, really. I knew what it was like to be homeless. 10 years into my story of being a Christian, that was the hardest thing, was before God was being exposed about the fullness of my testimony, before I became a gangster, as you're about to hear. That place of shame was a very aggressive shame for me. We hear about women selling themselves behind closed windows, you know, through a one-way mirror to men that are going to buy them. But I'm telling you, women do exactly the same. There are places in Sydney and around the world where men are sold like meat too. I was one of them. Yeah. I was 25 years, a bodybuilder, in shape, standing before a one-way mirror, not knowing who's behind the mirror, for someone who's about to purchase you for sex.
And shame is brought on by obviously things happening to us that are so out of line with our values and our true core that we carry the shame with us, and we know shame is a solo experience. While we have it in our heart and we don't share it with others, that shame stays there. But as soon as we start to talk about it to others and admit that it's there, then that's when the shame can become less and less, isn't it? It can diminish a bit.
Yeah, well, as you hear from my life story now, 12 years on, 11, 12 years on now, having a look back at that experience from homelessness to prostitution, look at the stuff that I'm doing now through human sex trafficking, women who are in brothels, women who have been trafficked in the community, child prostitution, exploitation. The fullness of my life story is a story of brokenness, but experiences in life. What better people to speak into people's lives when you've actually been there, because it's hard for a person to be exposed. They're not going to open up to you unless you can share something about your story. So prostitutes wouldn't be comfortable speaking to people, even if they had an education and mind and heart sort of stuff. But if there's the evidence of someone saying, "Man, I've been where you've been,"
there's such power in it. And I think it's the difference between talking the talk and walking the walk. I can't sit alongside somebody that's lost a child, because I've not lost a child myself, but I can sit alongside somebody where I've been to the depths of suffering in the same area as someone else. So your testimony and the journey you've walked means you can not rescue somebody out of it, but you can meet them in the place that they're at without saying any words at all. They know that you have a connection there because you've lived it. And that's the energy, isn't it, that resonates, that you don't need to say something. You could sit on the pavement next to them and be there in it because you've been there. So again, the message to our listeners is that they might not have been on the streets, they might have not been a prostitute, but all our listeners have suffered in some way, and therefore they can sit alongside other people in that same case scenario because they have also walked the walk. And what I'm really interested in is, you say that you went onto that cliff top and that you wanted to commit suicide, but you couldn't do it. And again, there's listeners here that are in such desperate places. They want to go to that cliff top, or they're standing on that cliff top psychologically in their mind. They want to jump out of life. They want to jump off that cliff. Maybe haven't got the courage to do so, or actually want to do so. And again, it's that you are so loved, you are so worthy, you've got such a purpose. You haven't come this far in your suffering just to end it now. There's a purpose, there's a plan for your life, and there's a journey ahead, like you're telling us now, is that, this can all turn around and you can come back to that raw place of suffering and actually find, ironically, beauty in it and joy in it. Because that's where it is birthed, isn't it? In that transformational place where we can carry on. So if you're at the lowest place you can be in your life right now, this is the turning point. Don't give up right now.
Yeah, I mean, like, I've never shared this with any platform. The moment standing next to 6 other men, some probably enjoyed sexual exploits, all of that, but I was horrified, not knowing what was behind that window, and presented also with a number, and whenever you call my family would say, like, how you going, and the last thing you want to tell them is that you've been sold for for a couple $100. It would just torment my parents, my mum actually. So I kept, that was a secret the shame that I had in my heart. No amount of money can change the thought process of what you actually did back then. It was hard for me to come out with that, but I'm not embarrassed about that anymore. It's just lust of the flesh. It's just one of those things. I remember speaking in the Arohata prison 10 years ago, and most of these women were looked at us men that came in. There was Michael Jones and Ronnie Clark, the All Blacks. We came in, and they didn't want to have a bar of us. And again, I had a private conversation in my heart with the Lord, and I said, how do we win the hearts? What's the key to unlock the hope that's in their heart so that they would listen to my story in you? And he said, just apologise. I said, just apologise. For who? And he said, for men, for brothers, for fathers, for sons that have said nasty words, that have been violent towards them in any sort of way. Just say you're sorry, and you stand in the gap for them, for the way men have treated them or saw them or done things to them. I want to tell you that the atmosphere had changed in an instant through the power of those words were spoken. I'm sorry. I had their attention, and then I was able to share, because I don't look like a person who's been to prison. I don't have any tattoos. I don't have, I'm pretty clean cut. 10 years ago, I even looked more clean cut. But in that instance, God had their heart, and then I shared a truthful story about my transition from darkness to light. And at the end, they all gave me a hug. Some didn't even say words, but I knew that they were crying through my story, because there was someone who they could actually align with and saying, yeah, you've been through the stuff. I know what you're going through. I'm still in it.
And that's so beautiful, Owen. You actually gave them something that they probably have never had before. They probably have never heard an apology. And we all know everybody in prison is suffering trauma, because most people don't want to be there. Most people don't deserve to be there. Most people have probably just been lost along the way, and they've had no help to deal with their issues, anxieties, stresses, shame, guilt. So for you to give them that apology, it was probably just music to their ears. You gave them some value. You gave them some of their worth back. They realised it wasn't all their fault.
Yeah, that's a memory I'll never forget. Again, I put it down to, again, I just love the love or the goodness of God, that He shows me what to do, tells me what to speak.
And love obviously is such a powerful motive for you to do what you're doing now. How did you find that place of love from being so broken and being rejected in human love? How did you find that place of love to be able to serve and carry on?
Yeah, so even we were poor as kids living on a farm. We 6 kids top and tailing in beds, living in sharing quarters sheds. We still remembered, then there was hard times. I remember heated conversations between my mum and dad when we were young, because they never had any money. But I still remembered the good times, and I knew that they loved us. So there were still moments in those hard times that we knew that our parents loved us, that they put the sacrifice to live the way that they did, to give us life. And obviously my bad turn came just from a broken relationship. I didn't plan on that happening. It just happened, and I was desperate for love. And I've always been a person, I've never got close to anybody else after that, even that relationship, because yet again, I know what it's like to be rejected. And I thought, I've never let anyone get close to me in that respect, because again, I'm all good though. I'm just now in my heart, I pondered, that's all good. If love comes along somewhere, then that's cool. But I'm very fussy, and I'm fussy as, and so it's possibilities.
That's hilarious. I'm very fussy. I like that. Why wouldn't you be? You might as well.
Yeah. Well, she's got to be able to want to travel. You know what I mean? She's got to be able to love charity, and she's got to love God more than I do.
I'm sure your perfect match is out there somewhere, and you don't deserve to have your heart broken again. You've got the most colourful of stories. You're in Australia in the sex industry, and then you mentioned something about being a gangster. What's the next part of the story? I'm intrigued.
Yeah, every time I'd walk to the gym, I'd go past all these big nightclubs and all these big bouncers on the door, and I was in good bodybuilding shape. One of the guys goes, "Do you want some work?" And I said, "No, I don't really want to do security. I've done security work before." And he goes, "Not security. If you want, you can go for a ride with our mate in the morning." And so I went for a ride, and we were going out to Bondi in a car, and the driver goes, "Mate, under the seat, there's a bag there. Open up, have a look. What's in there's for you?" I thought, "What is it?" And he goes, "Have a look." So I opened this bag up. There was a sawn-off shotgun, a balaclava.
Wow.
And I said, "What the heck is that for?" And he goes, "Do you think they're just going to give us the money?" I thought, "What money? Are we going pig hunting or something?" And he goes, "You can get out of the car if you want." He pulled the car over. He said, "If you want to get out, you can get out." You know what? I never got out of that car because I wanted an avenue out of the sex industry. I didn't want to do that anymore. And so I never got out of the car. That was my introduction into heavy debt collecting. I was introduced to the underworld of Australia, where you were knocking on doors for people who owed money for drugs, heavy debt collecting, whatever. So it was a short space of time. I was in a nightclub, and the police had found out where we were, and there was a raid on the nightclub. And as I went to exit this nightclub onto one of the main streets of King's Cross, there was a whole tactical response team waiting, and I got my first set of handcuffs on me. That's the most scariest thing I've ever had was a set of handcuffs, because like many people, we've watched movies about prison. I had this mask instantly come on through fear of being raped by a man. I thought, My skill set's in the Navy is going to teach me how to survive. I'm not getting raped by no man in prison. And so, going out to maximum security prison in Sydney is it's quite scary. There's 1,000 people on remand. I made friends with the kingpin of the prison, who I was just amazingly speaking to 3 weeks ago. He got in contact with me. He became a chapter president of the Bandito's Motorcycle Club, and Ray and I used to pump the heaviest weights. I'll put a link to this after this, and he'll probably respond to it. And him and I used to pump the heaviest weights in the prison. I had many fights in prison. It's a hard thing in prison. If you can't look after yourself, you will get raped. If you can't look after yourself, you could get hurt, and many people have lost their lives in there. So that was the start of my journey of 12 years wearing a mask on how to survive.
Wow. Owen, that's just such a huge story. I mean, I worked in maximum security prisons in the UK, so I know what men and women's prisons are like. And I wasn't being admitted myself to go into a prison for the first time, to cross those gates, to go through the security. You enter into another world that most people have never experienced and won't experience. But there's a line, isn't there? And once you go into prison, you've crossed that line. And there's such a sense of hopelessness. And also, I also found in prison such a sense of hope, because it's so broken that people want to turn their lives around. People are desperate for any help they can get because they don't want to be there. So it's such a dichotomy of extremes in prison. How long did you spend in prison, and what was the major takeaway that you have come out with?
So I spent multiple times in prison. So that first occasion was 1.5 years. And I've seen many people lose their lives in prison, stabbed to death with toothbrushes, stabbed to death by just utter violence. So yeah, it can be not a nice place for a lot of people. It's scary, to tell you the truth, because at night time, all you hear is trauma, people screaming, they want to go home, they're sorry. When they get used to living in those places, some long-term, or people have been in and out of those places, just becomes second nature. Do you know there's a lot of people in prison when it comes up to winter, because they can't eat on the outside because they're on got no funding, or from the government, whatever, nobody wants to look after them. So a lot of old people commit crimes. They just go and do something at the shop, do something to get in trouble so that they can spend 3 months in prison because they've got food, no one tormenting them, asking them to move on. I've met so many people, hundreds of people.
It's funny you should say that, because my dad actually went to prison when I was young, and I had to go to maximum security prison over in Liverpool in the UK, and then he got moved to an open prison. That's one thing that I found, and like looking at the inmates, and some of them were there for comfort because they didn't know any other way. They had no security of a family, they had no home to go to. So you're right, they actually just kept committing petty crimes because they actually felt safer in prison than they felt anywhere else.
Yep, it's true. You don't know how to survive on the outside. The people I'm dealing with at the moment, a lot of them are coming out of prison, but there's no hope, there's no love, there's no mentoring, there's no family. So the only family that they gel to is what's within their vicinity. So for street people, gel towards street people, and the addictions that they're in, whether it's drinking, whether it's drugs, synthetics, whatever. It's a vulnerable place to be in if you, for any reason, find yourself homeless. If you can't get a person off the streets within 3 weeks, you've got major problems.
Yeah. Oh gosh, I love those words you talk about. Is a vulnerable place to be in, and we're talking about prison, and yet all I can think is that a lot of people have not been to prison, and lots of listeners now will be resonating with actually being in prison, their own prison, that they're vulnerable in a prison of their mind. They're so trapped. And we've had amazing men on our podcast talking about men's groups, men supporting men allowing men to be vulnerable. And the same is for women too. Women, I think, do it slightly more naturally. But we're all, and I talk about myself as well, we're all kept hostage as prisoners in our own minds, in our own lack, in our own insecurity, in our own fear. And it's only when we are able to be really vulnerable and real can we come out of those places to mature into that journey. And we never arrive anywhere, but it's that constant journey of soul searching, acknowledging, digging deep, getting rid of the shame, getting rid of the anger and the hatred, forgiving ourselves, forgiving other people. That's the constant journey we're on. And I think, again, a powerful message to the listeners that you don't need to have been in prison or have been to some of the dark places you've been, but we all go to dark places in our minds, in our relationships, in our judgments, in our fears. And I think the biggest takeaway for that is that, you know, we can come out of our prison. You came out of your prison physically, but psychologically as well. You've also come out of your prison.
Yeah, loneliness is a big one for people because they have no identity. Identity has been bruised because of words and situations that they've never been dealt with, these root causes. It's very hard, as you say, when people to open up to anything that's going to bring out shame or put them in a vulnerable position. And that's why when you find people who are non-judgmental, have love in their heart, if you've got love to give, you'll feel it. You'll know a person, they're in a place of rest. I call it a place of rest, and they have a listening ear. A lot of people, sometimes when you meet them too, they don't actually want you to give them the medicine to heal them straight away, because they're trying to process in their mind the transition, what you want from them. What do you want? Why are you here? All these things. And what do you want from me? These are questions that people, because of the exposure, and you can tell when you're listening, you've got a listening ear, you won't have to say much, because most of the time people say, like, I just want you to say nothing. I just want you to be my friend and just sit with me.
Yeah.
Because our heart always tells us that we have to fix them there and then. So we say all probably the right things at the wrong time to try and help person, but actually we create a bigger mess.
Yeah. So Owen, obviously you have got such a colourful story, and some of it's heartbreaking, and you know, some of it you bring laughter to, even when perhaps it was your darkest times, you know, and we're quite good at doing that as people. You know, Sue and I often cry and then honk laughing, because that's just how we deal with things. It's a coping mechanism. But how did you turn your life around? Because obviously in and out of prison over the next several years. So what was your catalyst to change your life around?
Yeah, again, you know, I guess God has a sense of humour, because he sent a person. I learned how to communicate with people, especially when they're in trouble, because I believe one of the best debt collectors with a compassionate heart. If I went to your doorstep, I knew you were in trouble. The amount of words and the process of actually speaking to you was in a place of desperation. I'm desperate for you to make some wise decisions, because the person sitting in the car out there is a Russian. He's a Serbian, and he's got a shovel in the boot, and I don't feel like digging holes today. I've never had to dig holes, you know, for people that are in trouble for drugs or for money, whatever. I've pleaded. I want to tell you, this is what I know about women. Women are stronger than men when it comes to confrontation about dealing with debts or problems, because if a man was in trouble, I knocked on the door, a woman would answer the door. And they'd be like ferocious as, they'd be like swearing at me. I'd be like, listen, did you come here to scare me? I said, listen, I'm pleading with you. There's a Russian sitting out in the car there, and he's got a shovel in the boot, and I'm not digging any holes. And tell me how you're going to pay $300,000 back to the banditos. I would struggle going back to meet the big boss man, because, you know, when you've been sent out to do work, he wants the job done. He wants his money. And, like, you know, I'd be turning up at wrestling, and he'd be like, how'd you get on with that money? I'd be like, they're going to pay you $10 a week for 300 years.
Oh, and we could sit and listen to your stories all day. Joe and I would literally give up our day to hear all your stories one by one. I mean, as Joe says, they are traumatic. They are, you know, really dark stories and painful stories, and yet you can find the joy in them. For our listeners, before we leave, what is the biggest takeaway from those hugely dark places to you now being so empowered in love and loving and holding others?
Second part of my part of suicide was with a loaded 45. I remember it just like yesterday. I rang my mum up and I said, Mum, I'm sorry for my existence. I'm such a train wreck. I'm sorry. And she goes, what are you talking about? And I said, oh, I love you, Mum. And I just want to tell you, I'm tired. And she goes, well, come home. And I says, I'll see you soon. She said, don't you do anything. And I said, I love you. And I put down the phone and I went down to the beach. I loaded my clip, my 45. I loaded each round into that clip. And it was 12 o'clock at night, and I went down to the beach, and I put the gun right underneath my chin like that, and I pulled the trigger, and it went click. And that's when I said, and I emptied the clip out, and there was a round jammed up the spout, and I said, God, if you're real, help me. I don't know who you are. If you're real, I'll give this up, and I'll serve you. And I sat there with that gun with that round up there, and I didn't know how God was going to do it. In my back pocket was a little book, and it brought back a memory of a friend that used to come and smoke drugs at my place, and he knocked on the door, and I said, come in. We were about to smoke drugs, and he said, I'm not coming to your place ever again. I said, why is that? And he goes, you're going to laugh at me, Owen, but I'm going to church. And I started laughing, and I said, "You're joking, right?" And he goes, "Nah." He goes, "I've got you a gift." And I thought he was going to give me crack cocaine, but he gave me this little book. I said, "What's that?" He said, "Oh, and you're going to need it one day." I said, "What is it?" He goes, "My first Bible." And I said, "What would I need that for?" And so anyway, when I opened that book up, I said, "Lord, I'm just going to open this." I opened it to Psalm 23. "Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I'll fear no evil. For you, O Lord, are with me. Your rod and staff, they comfort me." Listen, I don't know what the words of the Bible were, what a rod and staff is, but the valley facing some death, that was me. So anyway, in my desperation, God sent a man of God to show me kindness and generosity. His wife and others, they took me into the street, and I watched them from the car give of blankets and clothes, just like I'm doing now. And I was so challenged by what I saw. When I come back, I said, "Man, what is this about? This is really late at night." And he said, "Do you know anything about Jesus? This is what he's like. My wife and I and others, this is how we serve God." So, and for me, I was facing 15 years of prison for a series of armed robberies. And because of their kindness and their generosity to love on me, they pulled me out of a hard place. They were a demonstration and an action of what I didn't want to read in a book called the Bible. And so if that's what Jesus looked like living in them in 2007, well, that was the closest thing I'd ever get to reading a book. I liked what they did. I loved the love and the compassion that they had. And I thought, I'm going to do what they do one day. So truly, I'm an expression of Pastor Ken and Jean and others who gave of their time to mentor me, to restore me, to teach me principles of life. And as I started to navigate and work through those things, I found others that were just like me. And so although my testimony I've shared with you today is me, myself, and I, all of a sudden now I'm able to talk about we, us together, whānau family, with gifts, with talents, with life skills, to be able to bring people to a place of rest or into a place of understanding. It's in the meeting of people who can do journey with you. You're going to find people you're going to journey in life with, who are going to share experiences. And that's what happened. You start to create more than just being friends, you become family. And so we need each other.
That's amazing. And like with many of our guests, you have turned all of your pain into passion, and all of your experiences that you've been through, you use each and every one of them to help all of the people who you help. And you are an inspiration, and all the kindness that you show others, you understand people, and you do it just with pure love in your heart. There's absolutely no judgment about people, and it's a gift, and it's a gift you've been given, and it's a gift you've honed as well. So good on you. Well done you for turning everything around.
Yeah, listen, I've been to 50 nations, right? By the kindness of God and the goodness of people. Having criminal convictions has not stopped me from being able to journey to places and say, "How in the world did you get into that nation?" And I said, "Well, I stand before people. Some people, I don't even have any paperwork." And then I said, "Just let your yes be yes and your no be no." So it's not a hard thing for me to share about restoration, about building projects, feeding programs, orphanages. I got to Iraq to be with the Yazidis people, the girls who have been trafficked by ISIS, on escaping ISIS from Sinjar, going up into orphanages up in Pakistan and Cambodia, sex trafficking in Sydney, up in Russia and other places. So it's multifaceted. What I'm involved in, what you're reading about in New Zealand is just an arm or a stream of something that I've been passionate about doing. But as people step into the things that we've been journeying in, I can just take my hands off it and then just say, like, I just come back and serve in the things I do now, and it's great to see others stepping up and being the boss. And I just love it. I just drive the car now.
And your passion, Owen, is so infectious. It's interesting that you talk about kindness and generosity, because the message I'd like to leave listeners today is that no matter how dark the place is that you are walking in right now, somebody does come along with that kindness and generosity. If you can just hang on a bit longer. Joe and I have also walked a very dark journey, and the kindness and the compassion and the generosity of others came along. Just hang on in there. It is so worth it. You are so worth it too. And for the kindness and compassion and generosity that you've shared with us today, Owen, thank you so much for the message for our listeners that it is worth hanging on, that life, there is beauty in the vulnerability and the rawness. You are such a testimony to so many, and we are so honoured to have you on board today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Owen.
Bless you guys.
Thanks so much for being with us today. For us to inspire others to live their magnificently imperfect life, please subscribe and leave us a 5-star review on iTunes or on your podcast app. You can also follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Pods with Posh and Pool. We can't wait for you to join us on our next episode. Love, light and peace.